I first began with this society a long time ago, and in fact I first began outside the society. There was a journal established called the Annals of the History of Computing, and it was first established with a group known as AFIPS, which no longer exists. And when they sort of collapsed, the journal was taken over by one of the commercial publishers who promptly made a complete mess of it. And eventually the board for that journal, the editorial board, approached the Computer Society because some of them were members of the Computer Society and asked to be taken on in that context. So that sort of brought me into contact with the Computer Society because I did a few sort of minor things for that journal from time to time. I was at a meeting of the Society and was up in the hospitality suite, which they have at each of these meetings, and sat down beside some woman who I had not known who she was at all. And she had asked me what I did and things like that. And I said, you know, I've had fun doing this job. I don't know how to keep in touch and do other things for the Society. She said, oh, you're interested in staying on? And I said, yeah. Well, little did I know, this woman was Laura Colita, who was eventually president of the Society. And at that time, she was head of the nominations committee. And I soon found myself being sucked into doing other jobs, thanks to Laurel.
Mike was president of the Computer Society in 2007, and I was appointed to be a vice president of standards that same year. And so the first time I got to work with Mike was in January at his planning meeting. And it was quite a difficult position that Mike was taking over. And I saw his strong leadership and outstanding character in leading the Board of Governors and the Executive Committee, starting at that meeting and throughout the year.
My father-in-law, he was a private businessman, and he sold his business and retired, but he soon had some major health problems. And he once told me, you know, look, I'm very glad I retired when I think he was 59. And he said, because otherwise I would never have had a retirement, and he died shortly afterwards. And I took that to heart, and I thought, okay, here's a chance to get out. Maybe I should take it. And I also had this feeling that, again, I was getting old and the students were starting on computer stuff that I wasn't the least bit interested in, like the beginnings of the Facebook kind of things. It wasn't Facebook then, but and I had this vision of carrying on until I was, in my mid-60s or something, and there would be a group of students down the end of the hall sort of pointing in my direction and whispering and saying, see that fella down there? He still thinks it's 1985. And I thought, if you have a chance to get out and do something else, now's the time to do it. I still give lectures from time to time for my colleagues who aren't going to be there, or just want somebody to come in and give a lecture on a different topic, because I'm actually a historian, and specializing in the history of computing, of course. And so there's several of them that ask me to come in and sort of give a couple of lectures on this every year. It's the people that interest me most. The technology is interesting too, because I've written about technology from the times of ancient Egypt all the way up through the Middle Ages and on to more modern computing, because of course people had to do computing. If you're going to build pyramids, you've got to know how to calculate the volume of stone you need and things like that. And they had some interesting ways of doing it, particularly, people joke about Roman numerals, what's xi times ib? And it's almost impossible to do arithmetic in Roman numerals, but that's because the ones we call Roman numerals are not what the Romans used. They used a simpler version without that subtractive principle where IV means 4 rather than I. The Romans just used the I kind of scheme. And that makes their arithmetic very easy. And a lot of the very early computer pioneers had interesting stories themselves. They were often unusual people because they wouldn't have done these unusual things for the day in the creation of the first early computing systems if they weren't that way. And just simply learning about the quirks and the interesting kinds of background that some of them had, I just find fascinating.
He implemented several important changes in the way our staff and volunteer programs are structured. This resulted in significant operational efficiencies and a dramatic improvement in the way we are able to deliver member and customer services. It was this long-term structural transformation initiated by Mike that we still benefit from today. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome this year's recipient of the Richard E. Merwin Distinguished Service Award, Dr. Michael Williams.
Always be open to trying something new. I've obviously changed direction several times, and eventually hit on this one that I really liked, basically the history of science and technology. And it was the sort of thing that has led to all sorts of interesting opportunities just by being willing to try something new. And that's probably the kind of guiding philosophy I have, but it's never been properly verbalized before. It's just been sort of the way I do things. And, joining an engineering society and eventually working my way up to president was something I never thought I was going to do either.
When I joined the executive committee, I really didn't know Mike Williams. He came from another part of IEEE. He had been a long expert in the history, working for the Smithsonian Institute. He was in charge of the Computer Museum out in California. I came up through standards, and I'm in industry. Mike was in academic. He was in Canada, which has its own flavor of culture. And he really rose to the occasion. He rose out of the typical stereotype, you might say, of a university professor or somebody working in the archives. He took on such many challenges to address the needs of our society and make it strong. And I'm very honored to have worked with Mike.
I'm very honored, of course. This is a major award from the Major Volunteer Service Award. So I'm very happy to be recognized by that. It's sort of a vindication of some of the stuff I've done. And I'm joining a list of people who I highly respect and highly regard as being some of the great leaders in the past. You have occasional bad weeks in your life. This week has been very good because my wife and I came down to Georgia a week early, and we spent some time in the Great Smoky Mountains and up in that area because we were celebrating our 50th wedding anniversary. So I've had 2 really good things happen this week. And it's always nice to see somebody who has made a career in something to try and give back a bit. And one of the ways of giving back, not the only way, of course, but one of the ways of giving back is to, work as a volunteer on the publishing side or the standards side or the technical side. And this society certainly couldn't exist without these thousands of volunteers doing all of this kind of thing. Be open to doing strange and different things. If somebody comes along and just sort of presents something to you, or, we wish we had a XYZ or something like that, give it a go. You may find you're no good at it at all, in which case you back out and try something else. But if you just plod along on the same old, dull, routine thing, that's probably all you're going to end up doing for the rest of your life. And even if somebody doesn't, open a door for you, try and look around for a door and open it yourself and just see what's on the other side. As I say, if you don't like it, you back out. But eventually you'll find something that turns your crank, and it can make for a very much more rewarding life.